Hi guys, it's Miss Strauss here, and I'm here today to talk about topic 1, representing relationships. And specifically, we're going to focus on the first lesson today, which is quantitative reasoning. So there's 3 key ideas in this lesson. We're going to go through each of them one by one. Each of them is in the description below, so if you know there's one particular area you're having difficulty with, you can skip to that portion of the video. So, key idea number 1 is understanding quantities, making sense of what you're working with, what numbers you're working with when you're in some sort of mathematical situation. So, quantitative reasoning deals with quantities, and quantities are any measurable amount or value of something. In other words, if something can be described with numbers, it's a quantity. When you're doing quantitative reasoning, that's all about understanding how different sets of numbers or numerical data are relating to each other. When we're trying to show those relationships, we're going to use tables and graphs. So you're going to see lots of tables and graphs in this section. This lesson is also not just about reading those tables and graphs, but also actually understanding what they're saying. One thing I want to mention is, since this is a video, you can pause it at any time. So if you want to add some of these key points to your notes, pause the video, jot some ideas down, preferably in your own words. And when you're ready, unpause the video and we can move on. All right, so quantitative reasoning is answering the question, what story are the numbers telling? If you're answering that question, then you're doing quantitative reasoning. So let's look at a few examples here. We've got a table and a graph, and I'm going to grab my drawing tools here. So first of all, let's look at the table. If we're trying to figure out what quantities are involved, you need to look at the labels in the table. So we're talking about the number of songs. And remember, quantitative reasoning is looking at a relationship. So we can see we're looking at the relationship between the number of songs and the length of the playlist. And if we look at the different values, we can see that 0 songs, unsurprisingly, would last 0 minutes for that playlist. And you can see we've also got some units involved here. Really important to recognize what units you're working with in quantitative reasoning. 5 songs on the playlist would mean 15 minutes. By the time there's 12 songs on the playlist, that's maybe 40 minutes, and so on and so forth. So again, quantitative reasoning is all about being able to recognize what things we're working with. So this is not just a 0 and this 0 are the same number, but they're meaning 2 different things. This 0 is referring to the number of songs, and this 0 is referring to a number of minutes that is the length of our playlist. Similarly, looking over at our graph, we've got 2 different quantities we're working with. When we're on a graph, we want to make sure that we understand what quantities are along our x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, and which quantities are along our y-axis, which is the vertical axis. So here along our x-axis, we've got this label that it's time in seconds. And along the y-axis, we've got that we're working with the height in inches. And of course, it's also helpful to read the title to get a better understanding of what this situation is. It says throwing a ball. So it seems like somebody has thrown a ball, and then we're measuring the height in inches of that ball over a certain amount of time. Now, unlike in the table, we can't determine the exact numbers that we're talking about here because the graph isn't labeled with numbers. If it was labeled with numbers, so sometimes you'll see like little tick marks, and then it'll say like this is 2 units, and this would then be like 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. So you could see stuff like that. If you do, then you can use that to understand what's happening in the situation. But here we don't have any of that information. The graph is unlabeled. But that's okay, because we can still figure out a general idea of what's happening in this story, even if we don't have the exact numbers. We can see that the ball starts a little bit off the ground when we're at the beginning of our story, when the time in seconds is at 0 here. We can see that we're a little bit off the ground. Our height is not at 0. So maybe somebody's holding the ball at this point, and so that's why it's a little bit off the ground. Then they throw the ball up. That height gets up to a certain point, and then the ball starts falling. And then if you're wondering, wait, so what happens here and here? Why does it start going up again? Well, if this is the height in inches, then 0 would be the ground, So if we're down here, we're at the ground. So I would imagine the ball's probably bouncing. And that's why we get this sort of bouncing graph, is because that's what's happening in this story. So again, even though we didn't have precise numbers to know exactly how high off the ground it was, or how high up it got thrown, or how far it is in between bounces in seconds, how long it is from one bounce to the next, we don't know any of that because the graph is not labeled with a scale, but we do still understand that we're talking about the height of a ball compared to its time in seconds. So we can kind of reason about what that situation might mean. That's the big idea here. All right, so let's check for your understanding on this piece. First of all, make sure that you can answer what are quantities in your own words. How do you read a graph to determine what quantities are involved? Where do you look and what do you look for? And also make sure you understand how to read a table to determine what quantities are involved. Again, where do you look and what do you look for? That's quantitative reasoning.